Scaffolding ASP.NET Core Web API with JSON Web Token authorization. Scaffolding steps of the ASP.NET Core Web API. First, create default ASP.NET Core Web API. Second, explain folder and the file structures of the API. Third, customize and install necessary packages. 4. Customize, add extensions and configurations. 5. Manage security, especially user secrets, etc. 6. Add repository, orchestrator, and controller methods. Finally, 7. Test the API with Swagger and the Postman. Now, first, let's create ASP.NET Core Web API project. For this, I am going to use Visual Studio 2019. Of course, you may use other IDE as well. However, I am going to use the community version of the Visual Studio 2019. In the following section, first I will launch the Visual Studio, then create the project with default settings. Now let's start it. I am launching Visual Studio 2019. Now it's ready to create new project. First, I am going to create a new project, then customize it. Click the Create a New Project button. There are many templates available. I am going to create ASP.NET Core Web API project. So, looking for that template. This is the template for ASP.NET Core Web API with C#. I would like to select this. With this selection, move next. Project location. Select this folder. Select folder. With the settings, move next. I am going to use the latest version, namely the current version of the .NET 5. With the selection, now I am ready to create this project. Click the Create Project button. The project has been created successfully. Let's look at the project. This is the Solution Explorer window. There are several items, including folder and files. First, I will explain each item inside the Solution Explorer window. Then I am going to customize this project. Let's do that. Folder and the file structure of the API. This is the Solution Explorer window from the project we just created. If we expand this window, many hidden files will be displayed as shown in the screenshot. Default API consists of dependencies, framework applications, packages, as well as many folders and files. Note that some folders or files might be different if we create the same project by using another IDE. However, each item in the Solution Explorer will be explained in the following section. The first item is connected services. This connects and retrieves metadata from a WCF service in the current solution, locally or on a network, and generates source code file for a WCF client proxy that you can use to access the service. This is very important and a very convenient addition to the default project. By using these connected services, we can discover WCF services. Now, let's look at the dependencies. Actually, if we generate a document for an API by using Swagger without analyzer, we would see the details only for the status code of 200. However, with API Analyzer, it is possible to get a warningness for all written statements of the actions. For example, status codes of 200 for 400 and 404, etc. The next item is frameworks. We can create .NET Core application and configure multiple target frameworks so that it can run with all the configured target frameworks. There are 2 framework applications in this default project. The first one is Microsoft ASP.NET Core application. This is for ASP.NET web applications. The second one is Microsoft.NET Core application. This is for .NET Core API. The next item is properties folder. In default, there are only one file inside this properties folder. That is launch settings.json file. The settings in this file are going to be used when we run the .NET Core application either from Visual Studio or by using .NET Core CLI. Note that launch settings.json file is only used within the local development machine. This is the content of the launch settings.json file. Environment variable is set in this file. Override those set in the system environment. There are 3 objectives in this file. The first one is IIS setting. The second one is profiles. The third one is ASP.NET Core Web API. Now let's see each object. The first one is settings for IIS. When we launch the application inside Visual Studio. However, in this time, without installation of the Swagger, the application will be used this URL. Namely, the application will be launched by using this URL. The second object is profiles. This is also settings for IIS Express. When we run the application from Visual Studio, either by pressing Ctrl plus F5 or just F5, then by default the profile with command name IIS Express will be used. However, in default, the Swagger package is installed. Therefore, the settings inside this profile object will be used. Note that in the settings, we don't have application URL. We only have launcher URL. Namely, in the settings, the application will be launched within the Swagger UI. The third one is ASP.NET Core Web API. The name of the object is same with the project name. Namely, the settings for Crystal Server. If we run the ASP.NET Core application using .NET Core CLI, for example, .NET run command, then the profile with the command name project will be used. Note that if the Swagger is installed, at that time launch URL Swagger will be used. If the Swagger is not installed, at that time this application URL will be used. Now let's look at controllers folder. Controllers will be resided in this folder. Controllers and their methods will be explained in details in the customization section. Next item is app settings JSON. The default JSON configuration provider loads configuration in the following order. First, app settings JSON. Second, app settings.environment JSON. For example, the app settings production JSON and app settings development JSON files. The environment version of the file is loaded based on the iHosting environment.environment name. Namely, app settings.environment JSON values override keys in app settings JSON. For example, by default, in development, app settings.development JSON configuration overrides values found in app settings JSON. In production, app settings.production JSON configuration overrides values found in app settings JSON. It will change in based on the environment name. Now let's look at program files. This is one of the most important files in this application. Actually, the program file is a class. This is the class content. In the program class, we have a method, namely the main method. Therefore, this is the entry point of the whole application. Inside the main method, we are calling a method createHostBuilder. This is the createHostBuilder method. Inside this method, we are calling createDefaultBuilder and the createWebHostDefaults methods. To create default builder and the configure WebHostDefaults methods configure a host with a set of default options, such as use Crystal as the web server and enable IIS integration. Load configuration from appsettlements, appsettlements.environment name JSON, environment variables, command line arguments, and other configuration sources. Finally, send the login output to the console and the debugging providers. Therefore, the program class is very important. Inside the program class, we have the main method named the entry point of the application. ASP.NET Core apps configure and launch a host. The host is responsible for app startup and lifetime management. At a minimum, the host configures a server and a request processing pipeline. The host can also set up logging, dependency injection, and the configuration. All of these procedures are managed inside the startup class. Next, we will look at the startup class. Now, let's look at startup file. The startup file is one of the most important files in the application. Actually, the startup file is a class. ASP.NET Core Apps uses a startup class, which is named startup by convention. The startup class optionally includes a configure service methods to configure the app's services. A service is a reusable component that provides app functionality. Services are registered in configure services and consumed across the app via dependency injection or application services. The startup class also includes a configure method to create the app's request processing pipeline. In general, we use single startup constructor inside the startup class. However, in practice, multiple startup constructor is possible, namely startup development, startup production, startup staging. We can use different or multiple startup constructor. Startup plus environment suffix. We can create corresponding startup constructor. Now, let's see the startup class in details. This is the content of the startup class. Now, let's look at the startup constructor. In default, it is injecting configuration service. In practice, we can inject other services as well. For example, we can inject iWeb host environment, and we can also inject iHost environment. Now we are injecting configuration service only. In default, there are two methods in this class. The first one is configure services. The second one is configure. The configure services and the configure. As I mentioned earlier, configure services method is the place we can register as many as services. However, we can register services in an extension method, namely, related groups of registration can be moved to an extension method to register services. We will add some services in an extension method later. The second method is configure method. This method used to configure the HTTP request pipeline. Namely, this pipeline is composed as a series of middleware components. Each component performs operations on an HTTP context and either invokes the next middleware in the pipeline or terminates the request. Namely, all request comes to inside this method, and the related middleware process that requests. So we call this request processing pipeline. And this two method is very important, and this is the startup class. In summary, we have startup constructor, we are injecting iConfiguration service. Then we have two methods. One is configure services. There we can register services. And then second method is configure, and where is the place of a series of middlewares, and that middlewares serves to process incoming requests. So this class is very important and the starting point of the application. In the next section, we will customize this application by adding some services in the extension methods. Then that extension method will be called inside the configure services method. Install necessary packages. Packages to be installed. I am going to install these packages in this demo application. The first one is Microsoft ASP.NET Authentication JWT Barrier. JWT authorization will be implemented in this application. Therefore, each request will include a JWT, allowing the user to access routers, services, and resources that are permitted with that token. This means that the application should be able to consume JWT. Therefore, we need to install this package. The second one is Microsoft Extensions Dependency Injection. This package should be installed since services will be injected in this application. The third one is Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.mvc.versioning.API Explorer. Version information can be added to the API routers. In order to add version information, we need to install this package. For example, this URL doesn't have version information, namely without version information. However, we can add version information to the URL, just like this. API version 1, for example. This is the version information to be added after we install this package. The next one is System Data SQL Client. Install this package since an example controller method which retrieves data from the database will be added. I am going to access AdventureWorks database and pull in some data from the database. So I need to install System Data SQL Client. Next, Dapper ORM. Needs to be installed Dapper, a third-party ORM, since the application will access Adventure database. Now, let's install these packages one by one. This is the application I just created. Until now, I have explained items inside the Solution Explorer window. First, let's see dependency. There is a package folder. Inside the package folder, there is only one package now. Actually, this package has been installed during the project creation. Namely, this package has been installed in default. Now, I am going to install other packages using Manage NuGet Packages tool. I have listed packages to be installed here. I just copy the package name and paste it to the Manage NuGet Packages tool. Then select the latest stable version and click the install. Now I have installed all packages. Let's customize and add extensions to the project. After that, I will manage security, namely add user secrets, connection string, etc. First, I am going to add some folder. Now I am going to add extension methods. Now we have add configure cause method. This is the extension method. Now let's add the second extension method, and this method going to add version information to the application. Now I have added extension method of configure versioning. Now I am going to add configure settings extension method. This method will take care of database connection string, etc. Therefore, I need to create user secrets file. Then I am going to put connection string in this user secrets file. I have connection string and I am going to paste it here. I have Adventure Works 2014 database. This is database Adventure Works 2014. I am going to connect this database and get some data from this database. This is the connection string. Now I am going to add one model. Now I am ready to add the extension method. Okay, now I have added configure settings method. This method initiates the database connection string. Now let's add the last extension method, configure authentication. Okay, now I have added the extension method of configure authentications. However, there are three elements. The first one is issuer signing key. Second one is valid issuer. The third one is valid audience. So I need to add these in the secret files, because when I generate the JWT, I need to use this. And then after I generate JWT and give it the clients, and then client going to access this application, at that time this application going to consume that JWT. So when consuming the JWT, we use these keys and this valid issuer and valid audience. However, there are many payload elements, but simplicity, now I only use issuer signing key. This is most important. Then valid issuer and valid audience. Okay, now let's add these three elements to the secret key. I have prepared it. JWT payload elements in JWT, namely our current consumer application. Our application will be consume JWT. So I need to put these three elements, namely valid issuer, valid audience, and the issuer signing key. This is the secret key. This is the most important three elements. So I am going to put it in the secret file. Okay, I copy it, go to secret file. Okay. Now it's okay. Now I have valid issuer, valid audience, and issuer signing key. So this should be, these keys should be same as the consumer extension method. So I should save it. Okay, we need to compare it. Issuer signing key, issuer signing key. Then we have valid issuer, valid issuer. Then we have valid audience, valid audience. So this is the key. This is the test key, and we must keep this secret key is very safe. So using this parameter, this application going to consume JWT, which attached in the request header. Now I have added 4 extension methods. The first one is configure cause. The second is configure versioning, configure settings. The last one is configure authentication. Now it's time to add these extension methods to the startup class. Okay, I just copy methods and just paste it in the startup class here. I am going to paste it here. I just copy from here. For example, copy this and paste it here. Then copy other methods. Okay, now I have added the extension methods to the startup class. Save it. We have one issue here. Actually, we have added cause policy inside the configure cause. Namely, I have added this cause policy inside the configure cause extension method. I have called this extension method inside startup. So I need to add this functionality as well. Okay, now I have added the configures cores inside the configure services. Now I am going to add corresponding middleware in the configure, namely app use cores, then add this method, this policy. Copy, then okay, that's it. Now save it. Now let's try to load this application. This application should be loaded inside the Swagger because the Swagger application is added in default. Yeah. So we need to add in Swagger and the title here and the ASP.NET. Okay, let's run it. It should be loaded inside the Swagger. This is the first time loading it. Okay, it loaded. It works great. This is the default controller. So let's click this. Let's try it out. Okay, now we have this example value here, and if I click this execute, it will be return the default value inside the controller. Okay, it returns the value. Now it works. The next step is add repository, orchestrator, and the controller method. In this step, I am going to create a repository service, then create an orchestrator service. Finally, I will create a controller method that will pull some data from the AdventureWorks database. Then I will add authorization to that method and use JWT token. Namely, I will create JWT by using the security payloads we just added in the secret file, and then we will use that JWT access that method. In the next step, I am going to add repository class, orchestrator. Finally, I will add controller methods. For this, before I need to add some helper methods because I am going to use dependencies. Then I am going to access AdventureWorks database. Namely, I am going to access this database and I am going to display some data from the Adventure database. I would like to display the department data. So I need to create department object. In order to save time, I have prepared this code, and so I will copy the prepared code and paste it corresponding places. We'll start from the helper method. The helper method includes depper related code. This is the code I have prepared. So I copy the code and paste it. I just copy corresponding code, copy it, just paste instead of this. Okay. I will create department object. Okay, next. Create Adventure Works repository. Interface. Copy this. Implementation. Just paste it. Now let's create Adventure Orchestrator. First create interface. Copy, paste here, paste here. Finally create controller methods. Now we have added services. However, this is the error. Okay, actually we did not inject the services yet. Orchestrator, we inject here. Now I have services. I have repository service. I have orchestrator. I have IDP helper, so I need to inject them. I have prepared it. Okay, I have added injections. First, I have added model. I added model department class because I am going to access this department table in the AdventureWorks database. Then repository, this is the AdventureWorks repository. I am going to access department table, so this is the object going to be returned. This is the interface. I am going to implement this. I have implemented this here. This is the interface, and I have implemented this. Then I create the method. This is repository service. After repository service, I have created orchestrator using this repository service. This is the orchestrator service. Then I am going to return list of department objects. Okay, this is the interface. I implemented it here. This is the implementation. This is selection query. Finally, now I have Adventure Orchestrator service. So I should use this inside the controller. I injected it. I AdventureWorks Orchestrator service. Then I created one controller method. This controller method going to access the database by using the repositories orchestrator, and then returns a list of department object. Now I commented authorize. Later I will open this, and after I open, I will create JWT, and I will give the JWT to the client, namely the user of the postman. Then using the JWT, and we will access this method. First, I will try the application after adding the services. Let's try it. Okay, now we have the department method in the controller. Okay, let's try it. Okay, click this. Okay, it worked. It loads data. Okay, let's see this. Department ID 1, beginning, tool design, sales, for example. Let's see this. Here, sales, tool design, engineering. So it worked. Now we don't have authorized that controller method, so everyone can access it. If you authorize this, only person who has the JWT can access this method. Now let's do that. Stop this, and then okay, now I open the authorize it. Now I have uncommented the authorize. In order to access this method, we need to use that JWT, because in the extension method we added configure authentication, and we called it inside the startup. So that method namely the controller method which have authorized attribute being protected by the JWT. This method now being protected by the JWT. So in order to access this method, we need to send JWT with the request. In order to achieve that, we need to add one middleware here. That is middleware app okay, I have added it. Then in case service add HTTP client authentication method here. Then I have added authentication middleware here. Now this controller is being protected by the JWT. Okay, let's try it. I am trying to access this method without JWT first. Now I am trying to access this department method. Okay, I couldn't access it because here is JWT, because barrier. Now it's throwing error because this method is being protected by the JWT. Previously, I was able to access it and it displays data from the database. Now it won't work because we don't have JSON token yet. Namely, the client, for example, Swagger or other client don't have JWT token. So this method shouldn't work. So I need to create token, then I will give that token to the client, then client using that token access our method. I have methods, I have prepared it. Okay, now I have, this is a numeric value representing the number of the seconds from the 1970, January 1st. So I just copy it because I have prepared it. This is the expire date and about 10 days from now, and this is issuer and this is audience. This is the secret key. Please note that I have the same thing in the application. We have secret here, and inside the secret, for example, I have these keys. Same with this. Same with this. For example, this is the valid issuer. This is the valid issuer. Valid audience. This is the audience same. This is the issuer signing key. This is the secret signing key. Signing key, signing key. So okay, this is the JWT website, jwt.io. We can use this to create JWT token. I copy this, copy, I just paste it. Then I also copy the secret key, namely this portion. This is the secret key. Paste it here. This is the secret. Okay, now this is my JWT. I have created this JWT based on the payload data, expire, issuer, audience, and my secret key. Now I can use this. Okay, now let's exit the same method using Postman by using the JWT. Okay, now I copy this. I should copy this JWT, copy it, paste here. Then this is the method I am going to access. Okay, I have JWT here in the authorization, in the token. Then this is my method and I am going to access it. Okay, now the data comes. It worked. This is the data. Great. Now the JWT we just created, it worked. This is our method. Now Postman is the client of this API. This is the method being protected by the JWT. So by using the JWT here, for example, using the JWT here, we are able to access that method. Namely, that controller method being protected by the JWT, and now we can access it using the JWT. In the next step, you see, we don't have authorized functionality in this Swagger. So I need to add one functionality, then we can attach the JWT from the Swagger as well. So I need to add that functionality now. Okay, so I already prepared it. First, I stop this. I have prepared that method. It's basically an extension method, configure Swagger. First, I copy this extension method and paste it here, because we just created these extension methods: configure cause, configure versioning, configure authentication, etc. Now I add here and now explain this. Configure Swagger. Okay, now first we add documentation, and this is the version 1 and the URL to this API, web API. Okay, and then a description is URL to this ASP.NET web API. And then second is add security requirements, and this is barrier, and this is security schema. I need to add that JWT to the Swagger. That format is, first I add barrier, then space, then I add that token. Save this. This method should be called in the startup. Okay, I just call here, for example. It has okay, it has okay, Swagger here. I just added here. Save this. Now let's try it. Now this time we have authorized functionality here in the Swagger. If I comment this out, okay, this time I don't have that functionality. I don't have that functionality. Okay, so I open this and then save this, run. Now I have authorized functionality here. I can attach JWT from this Swagger now. Okay, let's do that. I copy this, copy, go to the Swagger, click here, authorize, then enter barrier, space, paste, authorize. Now close. Now, if I call this method, the JWT will be attached in the header, in the request. Let's try this method now. Okay, try it out. Now, we will see. Execute. Okay, now it worked. You see now barrier, and this is the JWT token. Now the result is returned. Namely, we have accessed that protected method. Until now, I have added a lot of functionality to this API. However, there is one last functionality. That is version information in the API URL. Let's try it. Now we don't have it. Let's see it. Now we don't have version information in the URL. Therefore, we need to add it. First, stop the API. Actually, I have added configure versioning extension method previously. Let's see it first. Here, I have added configure versioning extension method in the extension methods class. Then I have called this method in the startup class as well. Now, the next step is if I add some attributes to the controller method, this will work. Let's do that. This is the controller where I added attribute. That's it. Now let's try it. Now there is version information in the URL. Let's try it. Try it out. Now we need to enter version information. Version 1. Execute. Now we have version information in the URL. Thank you for your watching. You can find the link to the source code in the description of the video.